Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change and where to start. I apologize for missing you all yesterday. I just had some other things to take care of and was going to try and do a video, and then just got everything just careened off into Neverland, and I couldn't get a video done, but I'm going to try and get something in this morning. So some of y'all are talking about the chirping noise or the squeaky noise in the back. If I'm doing a video at night, there are really loud crickets here, a lot of them. So that's the noise. Don't let it scare you. Hope it doesn't throw you off your game. If I'm doing videos during the day, usually we'll hear birds or occasional machinery. But yeah, that's what the noise is. It's nothing going on with you. It's nothing going on with me. It's just the crickets having a good old time. Let them do what they got to do. Yeah, I like to discuss other things on this channel, and one of the interesting things around climate change is the idea of human cognition. And it's not just climate change, but just in our times right now, we have all this information at our fingertips, and we have all this information at the ready, and yet people are having a really hard time finding information or understanding information or looking at information or dealing with information. And it's not just an interesting subject for me, it's very important, I think. I don't, if we're all going to go on a quick timeline and all that, I get it. But we're still here, and we still have to deal with this, and deal with a possible road to the future. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? Who knows? What if there's some major negative feedback loop that just kicks in? So I'm sure some of you may have seen the video in which Guy McPherson kind of says, well, it looks like we're not going to have a blue ocean event, and for whatever reason, we're going to have ice. We're probably not even going to be, we'll probably be the lowest volume, but we won't be the lowest extent this year. So we get another reprieve. We get another year or two. That doesn't mean that other things aren't happening. That doesn't mean that permafrost isn't melting. That doesn't mean that methane isn't still coming out of the ocean. All of those things are still happening, but the interesting thing in this video was that one of the hosts, I guess, conjectured that maybe all the smoke from the fires was blocking some sun out, or maybe, who knows, particles from volcanoes, and that, it's all very likely. It is all very likely, and we really don't know. We can model and kind of project into the future what we think might happen, but there are randoms in the system. There are variables in the system that we can't account for everything. We can only that's all that scientists can do is go, here's what it looks like, and then there's all kinds of, there's a spectrum of what that could look like. There's from 2 years from now to 100 years from now or 300 years from now. There's all kinds of thoughts on how quickly things are going to progress. Obviously we're all in the boat that it's going to progress very quickly, but we don't know. That's the thing, is that you just that is life, and that is the universe. We don't know. We can speculate, and we can make an educated guess, until we're done, until things have fallen apart, we have to move forward in a way that's, somewhat positive, in a way that's helpful and communicative and understanding and intelligent. And, that is the logical thing to do in this situation. Prepare for the worst, expect the worst. But after you've done that, you have to kind of like exist in this system, or you have to exist in this world. You have to exist on this planetary, in this dimension, on this space, on this level. You have to, you have to function. So my goal in this channel is not just to cover abrupt climate change, but also cover, not just the things that brought us here, but the things that are going on right now. And part of what's going on right now is how humans are functioning. It seems increasingly not well, depending on your viewpoint. I think we are progressing at a very rapid pace, as far as technology, as far as understanding how people are working psychologically, how people are working emotionally, how people are. I think there's lots of fields being opened up. There's lots of avenues being opened up. There's lots of knowledge being opened up as far as how humans work, or how the world works, or how the universe works, and how the best way to go forward. Assuming that we aren't all going to go away. And all we can do is try and like do our best in evolving, in understanding a way forward, even if there is not a way forward. That's not hopium. That's just, it is what it is. The end is nigh, and it is what it is. But we are here now, so there's no point in being destructive. There's no point in giving up. If that's what you want to do, go for it. I just don't see how that can be very helpful to you or the people around you. So when I'm talking about other things, off the topic of climate change, and it could be anything. It could be politics, emotion, psychology, history, whatever it might be. I mean, I'm just trying to find a way for us to better understand. Here we all have this forum. Here we all have this ability to give and receive information, and that could only be for the betterment of us. And again, we don't know. What if some random negative feedback kicks in? What if the AMOC shuts down and, we do get some, what if a volcano goes off and we do get some kind of like random cooling event? And here we go. We've got, 5 more years or 10 more years or what, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. You have no idea what's going to happen. So get ready, understand what's happening, and, do your best to try and go forward in a positive way. And, prepare for disaster, prepare for the end, but also prepare for, the possibility that we might actually get a reprieve. We might actually, some random event could give us a couple more years. And then what do we do with that? When we were already like, oh, it's going to be over in next year, like, what do we do with this reprieve? What do we do with this time, this extra time? Do we make the best of it? Do we use the time to find a way out of this mess? Do we, what do we do? Just thoughts. Just thoughts. And certainly we want to take down and end whatever evil is afoot in the human experience. and in the biosphere experience. There's lots of evil afoot. So how do we deal with that? So in that vein, I'm going to read this article. This is from Vice, and I liked the title, and I read a little bit of it. I'm trying to figure out who wrote this. Anyways, I'm going to read it. Climate change will lock us into a feedback loop of stupidity. The more the world heats up, the less we'll be able to understand it. The less I will be able to read articles. What a gorgeous summer it's been. What a lovely, pleasant weather. What lovely, pleasant weather we've had. Normally the UK is, wet and overcast. So it's a lovely change that this summer will be remembered for. Horrible, sickly, yellow, red beating down on you, stopping you from working, sleeping, eating, walking anywhere, doing anything, thinking straight. My muscles always ache. My skin itches. I can't think. Fuck off with it being this hot. Fuck off. Sorry for the cursing. I'm just reading what he wrote. Anyway, long story short, I'm glad the weather seems to have changed now, but perhaps in a way the heat is continuing to dominate. I don't know if you've noticed, but accompanying the recent heat wave, there seems to have been a sort of upsurge in stupidity. I'm not saying that the UK was exactly a brilliant, gifted child before. This, after all, is the country that did Brexit, that welcomed austerity, that voted David Cameron in as prime minister twice. But over the last few weeks, things in British public discourse have been getting astonishingly even more stupid than they were before. Just try looking at the news, if you can bear it. At this point, it's like watching a couple have a fight a few places across from you in a train carriage. Yes, I know that technically it's silly season, so all the political journalists are pacing around their cells or wherever they work, like hungry dogs looking for something to gnaw on. But Jesus effing Christ, it hasn't been an edifying spectacle recently. Whether we're watching the Labour Party tear itself apart over the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, reading think pieces speculating as to whether Tommy Robinson, fresh out of prison as a martyr to free speech, has anything useful or relevant to say, or watching the Tory establishment tie itself in knots trying to defend Boris Johnson's recent controversial remarks about the burqa. Everything from I hate seeing women in burqas at the pub to wearing a burqa is inconsiderate to deaf people. There has been an odd, noble exception, but in general, no one in the media seems capable of treating any of the issues they are dealing with real seriousness. The real seriousness they in fact deserve. And this is particularly frustrating given that all that has been unfolding against a backdrop where complete disaster for humanity as a species seems to be lurking just around the corner. Because as we already noted above, it's been hot. It's been really fucking hot. It's been recorded record temperatures in Europe hot. It's been 93 dead from fires in Greece hot. It's been Arctic Circle on fire hot. It's no longer possible to claim that man-made climate change is a problem we're only going to have to worry about in a hypothetical future. It's here right now, and we are experiencing it. Of course, the media have noticed this, and in fairness to them, they have in recent weeks been covering climate change more than usual. But it may also be that the media's own way of approaching a problem, any problem, are simply inappropriate for an issue such as this. The philosopher and Green Party activist Rupert Reed, for example, recently refused to debate climate change on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire because they wanted to include a climate change denier for reasons of balance. Here, the very ideal of balance seems to be becoming a dangerous orthodoxy, one that is actively threatening our ability to talk about issues facing us as a society, as a species, as a planet with seriousness they deserve. But just think about how the heat was making you feel again. If you're anything like me, it was not making you feel bright and alert and alive. Plausibly, it could well be that the recent upsurge in stupidity is not only distracting us from the need to fight climate change, it might also be a symptom of it. In his excellent recent book, New Dark Age, James Bridle claims that as climate change accelerates, our ability to understand it will not increase but diminish. In pre-industrial times, from 1000 to 1750 CE, atmospheric carbon dioxide varied between 275 and 285 parts per million. From the dawn of the industrial age, they began to rise, reaching 295 parts per million at the start of the 20th century, and 310 parts per million by 1950. The trend is ever upward. In 2015, and for the first time in at least 800,000 years, atmospheric carbon dioxide passed 400 parts per million. At its current rate, atmospheric CO2 will pass 1,000 parts per million by the end of the century. The problem is this: high concentration at high concentrations of atmospheric CO2, human cognitive ability decreases. At 1,000 parts per million, for example, it drops by 21%. Astonishingly, atmospheric CO2 has already been measured at over 2,000 parts per million in substantial numbers at schools in both California and Texas. Elevated CO2 levels aren't even the only threat. That's insane. 2,000 parts per million in a school. Elevated CO2 levels aren't even the only threat. Studies have shown that elevated heat levels impair cognitive performance as well. And so it seems we are becoming trapped in a sort of endless feedback loop of stupidity. We've done one very stupid thing, wreck the environment by burning fossil fuels, and this in turn is making us even stupider. That will breed more stupidity, which will presumably cause us to accelerate climate change further, which will make us still stupider, and so on, until eventually the stupidity becomes so intense that we all simply die. Dying of stupid. Or to put it another way, look forward to a good decade of everyone arguing about whether or not the racist things Boris Johnson is saying are racist, while the party he starts leading in a few months enacts various openly racist policies, which the racism of will also curiously be a matter of debate before eventually East Anglia sinks under the waves. But who knows, maybe the heat could save us all after all. It's not happened this summer, but there's a clear link between higher temperatures and political unrest. Boom, boom, boom. Heat not only makes people angrier and more impatient, it also gets them out of the house and into a public space. They start interacting with one another, and maybe, who knows, their anger can turn into something productive on the plausible assumption that the only way to mitigate reverse climate change is to establish a radically different form of political community. Maybe this would be a good way to go. Good stuff there. Yeah, interesting point at the end about unrest being tied to heat. I think there have been studies, or I saw something somewhere about the fact that maybe it was just an idea that the fact that the reason why we don't really get out and protest things or really get out and organize things is because we're too comfortable, because we have air conditioning. Before the widespread use of air conditioning, there were, riots and marching in the street. There were people just got out and put themselves, in harm's way because they were pissed. But if you got air conditioning and you feel, pretty relaxed and calm, and you've got food, it's hard to coalesce into an angry mob when people are driving in their air conditioned cars to an air conditioned building and eating all the food that they can possibly stuff in their faces. So when the AC goes out, then and only then possibly will people get really pissed enough to do something. Maybe just be pissed. I don't know. Moving on to the next story. Nevada, California desert half empty of birds after population collapse. Bird populations have collapsed in the desert along the Nevada-California border, and climate change could be to blame. According to a new study by scientists at the University of California, Berkeley, over the past century, the number of bird species has fallen by an average of 43% at survey sites across an area larger than New York State. 43%. Almost a third of species are less common and widespread now than they once were throughout the region. The study's authors, Steve Basinger and Kelly Ignayan, point to less hospitable conditions in the Mojave as the probable cause. California deserts have already experience quite a bit of drying and warming because of climate change, and this might be enough to push birds over the edge, said Ignayan, who conducted the research for her doctoral thesis at UC Berkeley. It seems like we are losing part of the desert ecosystem. The Mojave Desert is now nearly half empty of birds, said Basinger, a UC Berkeley professor of environmental science, policy, and management. This appears to be a new baseline, and we don't know if it's stable or if it will continue to decline. The researchers spent 3 years searching for birds at 61 locations on both sides of the border, including survey sites in the Spring Mountains and at Desert National Wildlife Refuge just outside of Las Vegas. They also surveyed sites across Death Valley and Joshua Tree National Parks and Mojave National Preserve, literally retracing the steps of famed UC Berkeley biologist Joseph Grinnell and his students from as far back as 1908. Grinnell carefully recorded bird and mammal distribution throughout California using a method of collecting field notes that is still widely used today. Ignayan revisited the same sites Grinnell and his colleagues surveyed between 1908 and 1947 and walked a path as close to theirs as possible as she charted all the birds she saw and heard. The past and present occupancy data was then compared and cross-referenced with short-term climate variation, long-term temperatures and rainfall trends, and habitat changes caused by wildfires, livestock grazing, and other factors. Ignayan and Basinger found that areas with reduced rainfall lost more bird species than sites that remained wetter. Their findings were published last week in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The decline of birds could impact the animals that prey on them and desert plants that rely on birds to pollinate their flowers and spread their seeds. Researchers are calling it a collapse because it has occurred across the entire desert bird community. Studies elsewhere have found that climate change typically makes places unfavorable for some birds, but opens the door for others to come in. Ignayan said, in the desert, we are not seeing increases in any of our species except for the common raven. There are a lack of climate change winners in the system. More species die off or die back. And I'm going to finish up with this article titled, Warming in the North Continues as Predicted. One of the ironies is that it takes a disaster to wake people up, by Ned Roselle. This is from June 21, 2018. Fairbanks, Alaska, just outside my window here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, workers are drilling into the asphalt of a parking lot using a truck-mounted rig. They twist a hollow bit 25 feet into the ground and pull up hard, clear evidence of why the blacktop is sinking. A few days ago, John Walsh gave a talk a few hundred steps from that parking lot. Walsh has spent 17 years in Fairbanks studying Arctic climate and learning about the last physical changes in the far north. He is the chief scientist of the International Arctic Research Center and an expert on global warming as it applies to the Arctic and subarctic. Back in the parking lot, an engineer guiding the work watches the drillers hit clear discs of ice about 7 feet below car level. The ice had been solid for centuries, maybe thousands of years, but the construction of a parking lot in the late 1990s is making it shrink. What used to be spruce trees and an insulating carpet of forest floor is now a layer of warm asphalt. Human assisted or not, thawing permafrost is a slow-motion disaster happening now in most of northern Alaska. Unlike a hurricane or a flood, the loss of permafrost is silent, rarely dramatic, and never fatal. In the back parking lot, university secretaries and grounds crew workers will steer into different parking spaces and go on with their days. Even though they are dramatic in scale, the northern changes John Walsh describes have the same subtlety. They happen far from where most people live and have not yet resulted in an emergency for most of the world's billions. For example, sea ice was just not there in the Bering Strait and Arctic Ocean this spring. That was new territory for open water, Walsh said. One of the ironies is that it takes a disaster to wake people up, Walsh said, noting that climate researchers in Canada got a funding bump after a wildfire flashed through Fort McMurray in Alberta, Canada in 2016. That was not the end of the article. At the end of his lecture, Walsh received a common difficult question. We believe what you are saying. Now what can we do about it? The parking lot might be repaired if workers dug a swimming pool-sized hole to remove all the frozen soil and then replaced it with gravel. Similar repairs will probably cost Northerners millions in the years to come. And that's just the bandage on the problem. Reducing the carbon dioxide that is warming the planet takes a worldwide effort. Walsh believes it starts from the bottom up, the people acting to reduce their own carbon emissions. He sees his job as spreading the word of what professionals are observing in the North and what it means for our future. I tend to look at creating awareness using our science for a purpose, he said. We're going to need a whole lot of answers and a whole lot of organizing, a whole lot more than we've even come close to turn that problem around. And we won't turn that problem around, unfortunately. Permafrost will melt. It's looking like it will all melt. Arctic and Antarctic ice will all melt. It's looking like it's all going to melt, save for some miraculous negative feedback. That is the way it is looking. So we can try and mitigate, but we're also going to have to plan to live very, very differently. And mitigation means planning on living very differently. So we're going to have to live very, very differently, no matter what happens, whether it is disaster or whether it is design. The way we conduct ourselves and our business is absolutely, positively not going to work anymore. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. Thank you, everyone, for your links and your comments and your discussion. I really, really appreciate it. I am hoping that we are all getting a little more enlightened here on this channel, incrementally day by day. And thank you for being a part of that. If you'd like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.